A secret morning. Rachel Bennett woke up at 5:45 a.m., just like every other Tuesday morning. The Seattle sunrise painted soft orange streaks across their bedroom ceiling. She turned her head slightly and watched James sleep beside her, his dark hair messy against the white pillowcase, his breathing deep and peaceful. Her husband. Even after 10 months of marriage, the word still felt strange and wonderful in her mind. She slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake him. Their morning routine had become a carefully choreographed dance. She would shower first, dress in her guest bedroom to avoid disturbing him, and leave for work at 7:15 a.m. James would follow an hour later, arriving at Horizon Media Group at 8:30 a.m. through the executive entrance. Two people living together, working together, loving each other, but pretending to be strangers for 8 hours every day. In the bathroom, Rachel studied her reflection while brushing her teeth. She had pulled her auburn hair into a professional low ponytail. Her green eyes looked tired despite the concealer she had applied carefully. The simple platinum wedding band on her left hand caught the light, and she twisted it absently, a habit she had developed over the past months. At work, she would move it to her right hand, claiming it was a family heirloom from her grandmother. The small lie had become so automatic she barely noticed it anymore. Her navy blue suit was pressed and hanging on the back of the door. Professional, capable, forgettable. That was the goal. Never stand out too much. Never give anyone a reason to question why the CEO seemed to smile a little brighter when she presented in meetings, or why his eyes would find hers across crowded conference rooms. "You look beautiful," James's voice came from the doorway, rough with sleep. Rachel jumped slightly, her toothbrush clattering into the sink. "You're supposed to be sleeping. You have that board meeting at 9. I have my wife leaving our bed at dawn. That seems more important." He walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. In the mirror, they looked like any other married couple starting their day together. "James," she said softly, but didn't pull away. "We talked about this. The separation is important." "The separation is exhausting," he corrected, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Do you know how hard it is to sit in meetings with you and pretend I don't know that you snore lightly when you sleep on your left side? Or that you cry during commercials with puppies? Or that you're the most brilliant marketing strategist I've ever met and also the woman I want to spend every moment with?" Rachel felt her chest tighten with emotion. 10 months, she whispered. "We've made it 10 months without anyone suspecting. We can keep going. Can we?" James asked quietly. "Should we?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken concerns. They had been over this discussion countless times. The professional complications, the accusations of favoritism, the judgment Rachel would face as the CEO's wife who also happened to work for his company. They had decided together that privacy was protection. But lately, Rachel had begun to wonder if they were protecting themselves or hiding from something real. The office arrival. Horizon Media Group occupied floors 30 through 35 of the Columbia Tower in downtown Seattle. Rachel had been with the company for 6 years, working her way up from junior marketing coordinator to senior marketing director. Every promotion had been earned through late nights, successful campaigns, and client relationships that generated millions in revenue. She was proud of her career, proud of what she had built with her own hands and mind. The elevator ride to the 33rd floor was crowded with colleagues greeting each other, discussing weekend plans, sharing coffee and morning gossip. Rachel stood near the back, her laptop bag over her shoulder, scrolling through emails on her phone and offering polite smiles when people made eye contact. "Rachel. Wait up." Angela Torres, her best friend and senior graphic designer, caught her arm as she stepped off the elevator. "Did you see the email about the 9 o'clock meeting? Patricia wants everyone in the main conference room." Rachel's stomach tightened. Patricia Donovan had been hired as Chief Operating Officer 6 weeks ago, brought in from a competing agency with a reputation for ruthless efficiency and dramatic restructuring. She had already fired 3 people in her first month, reorganized 2 entire departments, and made it clear that she valued results over relationships. "I saw it," Rachel replied, walking with Angela toward their desks. "Any idea what it's about?" Michael heard from someone in accounting that it might be about the Henderson campaign budget. "You know, the overrun last quarter?" Angela lowered her voice. "Patricia has been asking questions about project oversight and spending authorization." The Henderson campaign had been Rachel's project, a major automotive client whose demands had shifted midway through execution. The budget had increased by 18%, but the campaign had been wildly successful, generating 3 times the expected return. Rachel had detailed documentation of every decision, every client request, every approved expenditure. She wasn't worried about defending her work. But she was worried about Patricia's tendency to make examples of people. The conference room ambush. The main conference room was already full when Rachel and Angela arrived at 8:55 a.m. The space was designed to impress clients, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay, a massive glass table that could seat 20 people, and walls decorated with awards and campaign posters from Horizon's most successful projects. Several of Rachel's campaigns were featured prominently, including the Henderson automotive launch that had won 2 industry awards. Rachel took her usual seat midway down the table, setting up her laptop and pulling up her presentation files just in case. Around her, colleagues chatted nervously. Michael Green, the senior account manager, caught her eye and shrugged as if to say, "Your guess is as good as mine." Diana Wu, one of Rachel's copywriters, looked pale and anxious. Patricia Donovan entered at exactly 9 a.m., her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She was a tall, angular woman in her early 50s with steel-gray hair cut in a severe bob. Her black suit looked expensive and intimidating. She carried a thin folder and wore an expression that Rachel had learned to recognize as dangerous, calm, cold, and completely certain. "Good morning," Patricia said, her voice carrying easily across the room without being raised. "Thank you all for being punctual. This won't take long." She didn't sit down. Instead, she stood at the head of the table, opened her folder, and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "Over the past 6 weeks, I've been conducting a thorough review of operations, project management, and company culture at Horizon Media Group. I've identified several areas of concern that require immediate attention." Rachel felt her palms grow damp. Something about Patricia's tone was wrong. This wasn't about budget overruns or project reviews. This was something else. "One area of particular concern," Patricia continued, her cold eyes scanning the room before landing directly on Rachel, "involves inappropriate relationships between staff members that create conflicts of interest and compromise professional judgment." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Rachel's heart began to pound so hard she was certain everyone could hear it. "Rachel Bennett," Patricia said, her voice sharp as broken glass. "Please stand." Rachel stood slowly, her legs feeling unsteady. Around the table, her colleagues stared at her with expressions ranging from confusion to shock to uncomfortable fascination. "Ms. Bennett, you've been with Horizon Media Group for 6 years. Your performance reviews have been consistently excellent. Your campaigns have won awards. Your clients speak highly of you." Patricia paused, letting the praise hang in the air just long enough for it to feel like a setup. "However, it has come to my attention that you have been engaged in a personal relationship with a member of senior leadership that was never disclosed to human resources, in direct violation of company policy." Rachel's mouth went dry. Her mind raced through possibilities, explanations, denials. But before she could speak, Patricia continued. "This relationship has created the appearance of favoritism in project assignments, promotions, and professional opportunities. It has compromised the integrity of our workplace and violated the trust that Horizon Media Group places in all employees to maintain appropriate professional boundaries." "I don't understand," Rachel managed to say, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. What relationship are you referring to? Patricia's smile was thin and satisfied. I'm referring to your undisclosed personal involvement with James Callahan, the CEO of this company. An involvement that has influenced your career trajectory and raises serious questions about the legitimacy of your achievements here. The room erupted in gasps and whispered exclamations. Angela's hand flew to her mouth. Michael looked like someone had struck him. Diana Wu was staring at Rachel with wide, disbelieving eyes. That's not, Rachel started, but Patricia cut her off. Effective immediately, your employment with Horizon Media Group is terminated. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. Your final paycheck will be processed according to standard procedures. This meeting is adjourned. The words hit Rachel like physical blows. Terminated. Fired. In front of 20 colleagues who had become friends, mentors, and teammates over 6 years. Her vision blurred slightly, and she gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. There's been a mistake, she said, her voice stronger now despite the shock. I haven't violated any policy. I haven't engaged in any inappropriate relationship that was hidden or undisclosed. The evidence says otherwise, Patricia replied coolly. Phone records, shared car arrivals, lunch meetings that weren't documented. The pattern is clear, Ms. Bennett. You can try to deny it, but the facts speak for themselves. Rachel felt her face flush with anger and humiliation. Phone records? Shared car arrivals? They had been so careful, so deliberate in maintaining their separation. How had Patricia found anything? Unless someone had been watching them. Documenting them. Building a case against her for weeks. The conference room door suddenly burst open with enough force to make several people jump. Every head turned toward the entrance, and Rachel's breath caught in her throat. James Callahan stood in the doorway, and the expression on his face was unlike anything Rachel had ever seen. His normally warm brown eyes were cold with fury. His jaw was clenched so tightly she could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin. He was wearing a charcoal suit that made him look every inch the powerful CEO he was, but the controlled rage radiating from him made him seem even more formidable. What exactly is happening here? His voice was quiet, but it carried the kind of authority that made everyone in the room instinctively straighten in their chairs. Patricia turned to face him, and for the first time, Rachel saw a flicker of uncertainty cross the older woman's face. Mr. Callahan. I was just addressing a personnel matter that required immediate action. A personnel matter, James repeated slowly, walking into the room. His eyes swept across the assembled staff before landing on Rachel. Something in his expression softened almost imperceptibly when he looked at her, a brief flash of concern before the anger returned. You just fired my senior marketing director in front of her entire team without consulting me, without an investigation, and based on what evidence exactly? There have been reports of an inappropriate relationship, Patricia began, but James cut her off with a sharp gesture. Reports from whom? And inappropriate by what standard? He moved to stand beside Rachel, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell his familiar cologne that she had helped him choose 6 months ago. I'm very curious to understand what policy Ms. Bennett has violated. Patricia's composure was starting to crack. The company has clear guidelines about disclosing personal relationships, particularly those involving members of senior leadership. Ms. Bennett has been in a romantic relationship with you, and she never reported it to human resources. I see, James said, his tone dangerously calm. And did it occur to you to verify these reports before taking action? To speak with me, perhaps, or to conduct any kind of due diligence before publicly humiliating one of our most valuable employees? The evidence was clear enough that immediate action was warranted, Patricia insisted, but her voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. James looked at Rachel then, really looked at her, and she saw the decision being made in his eyes. They had discussed this moment in theory, late at night in their kitchen, wondering what they would do if their secret was ever discovered. They had always agreed they would handle it carefully, professionally, with proper procedures and documentation. But theory was different from reality. And the reality was that Rachel was standing in a conference room full of shocked colleagues, having just been fired and humiliated, and James was done pretending. "Ms. Donovan," he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "You're absolutely right that there's been a violation of company disclosure policy. However, you've made one critical error in your investigation." Patricia frowned. "What error?" "Rachel Bennett didn't fail to disclose a romantic relationship with a member of senior leadership," James said clearly. "She failed to disclose that she's been married to the CEO for the past 10 months. The silence that followed was absolute. Rachel could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the soft hum of the air conditioning, could hear someone's coffee cup being set down with trembling hands. Every person in the room was staring at them with expressions of complete shock. James reached for Rachel's left hand, the one where her wedding ring had been moved to her right hand that morning. He gently slid it back to her left ring finger, where it belonged, and held her hand firmly in his. "This is my wife," he continued, his voice softer now but no less clear. "We were married last July at the courthouse downtown. We chose to keep our marriage private for personal and professional reasons, but we never hid it. It was disclosed to our attorney, to Human Resources through the appropriate legal channels, and to the board of directors. What we didn't do was announce it to the entire company, because we believed that our personal life was our own business." He turned to Patricia, and the warmth in his voice disappeared. "So when you accused my wife of engaging in an inappropriate hidden relationship and fired her without investigation, without consultation, and without regard for proper procedure, you didn't just violate her rights as an employee. You demonstrated that you lack the judgment, professionalism, and basic competence required for your position." Patricia had gone pale. "Mr. Callahan, I was acting on information I received. I had no way of knowing about any proper disclosure." "Then perhaps you should have asked before taking irreversible action," James replied coldly. "Ms. Donovan, your employment with Horizon Media Group is terminated effective immediately. Frank Mitchell from Human Resources will be in touch regarding your exit procedures." He turned back to address the room, still holding Rachel's hand. "For everyone else, I want to be clear about something. Rachel Bennett, Rachel Callahan, earned every position, every promotion, and every success she's achieved here based solely on her exceptional talent, work ethic, and results. The fact that she's my wife doesn't diminish her professional accomplishments. If anything, it highlights them, because she spent the past 3 years working twice as hard to prove that her success has nothing to do with our relationship." Michael started clapping. It was slow at first, almost tentative, but then Angela joined in, and Diana, and within seconds the entire room was applauding. Rachel felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. James squeezed her hand gently. "Now, if you'll all excuse us, my wife and I are going to take the rest of the day off. Angela, can you handle the Morrison client meeting this afternoon?" "Absolutely," Angela said, grinning through her own tears. As they walked out of the conference room together, hand in hand, Rachel could hear the explosion of conversation behind them. But for the first time in 10 months, she didn't care what anyone was saying. She was walking beside her husband, openly, honestly, and the relief was overwhelming. In the elevator, alone finally, James turned to her. "Are you okay?" Rachel let out a long, shaky breath. "I don't know. Ask me again when I can feel my legs." He pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face in his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent and letting herself shake with the delayed shock of everything that had just happened. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know we wanted to keep it private longer." "I'm not sorry," James said firmly, pulling back to look at her face. "I'm done hiding the fact that I'm married to the most incredible woman I've ever met. I'm done pretending we're strangers. And I'm definitely done watching people underestimate you because they don't know the full truth." Rachel smiled despite everything. "You just fired your COO for me. I fired my COO for being incompetent and cruel, he corrected. The fact that she attacked you just made it easier. As the elevator descended toward the parking garage, Rachel realized that her entire life had just changed in the span of 15 minutes. Tomorrow, everyone would know. The media would probably find out. There would be questions, speculation, and judgment. But looking at James, seeing the love and pride in his eyes, she realized something else: she didn't have to face any of it alone. "Take me home," she said softly. "Our home," James clarified, smiling. "Where we don't have to pretend about anything." And for the first time in 10 months, they drove home together in the same car, in the middle of the day, without checking to make sure no one was watching. The aftermath begins. The drive home should have felt liberating. Instead, Rachel sat in the passenger seat of James's Tesla, watching the familiar Seattle streets blur past, and felt like she was floating outside her own body. Her phone had been buzzing non-stop since they left Horizon Media Group. Text messages, calls, notifications piling up faster than she could process. "You should probably turn that off," James suggested gently, glancing at her phone as it lit up again. Rachel looked at the screen. 17 missed calls. 43 text messages. Her mother. Her sister in Portland. College friend she hadn't spoken to in months. And Angela, who had sent 5 messages in rapid succession. "OMG, are you okay? That was the most dramatic thing I've ever witnessed. Also, you've been married for 10 months and didn't tell me? We are having wine tonight and you are explaining everything. I love you and I'm so proud of you." Rachel smiled despite herself and typed back quickly, "I'm okay. Wine sounds perfect. I'll explain everything, I promise." She turned off her phone and set it in her lap. "How bad is this going to get?" James was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the wheel as they turned onto their street in Capitol Hill. Their house, a charming 1920s craftsman with a blue-gray exterior and white trim, sat nestled among maple trees just starting to show their spring green. It was the home they had bought together 8 months ago, the place where they had learned to be married, to share space and dreams and quiet Sunday mornings. "Honestly," he said as he pulled into their driveway, "it's going to be complicated. There will be media attention, probably some industry gossip. HR will need to formalize some policies about spousal employment. But Rachel, we've done nothing wrong. We followed the legal requirements. We've been more careful about conflict of interest than most people would have been. Except the part where we lied to everyone we work with every single day," Rachel pointed out, unbuckling her seatbelt but not moving to get out of the car. "We didn't lie. We just didn't volunteer information about our private life." James turned to face her fully. "There's a difference between privacy and deception." "Is there?" Rachel asked quietly. "Because right now it feels like I've been deceiving every person I've worked with for the past 3 years. Angela is my best friend, and she had no idea I was even dating anyone, let alone married." James reached across the console and took her hand. "Why did we decide to keep it private? Really think about it." Rachel closed her eyes, remembering their conversations when they first started dating. "Because I wanted people to see me as competent on my own. Because you didn't want people to think you showed favoritism. Because we both believed that mixing our personal and professional lives would complicate everything." "And were we wrong?" James asked. "I don't know anymore," Rachel admitted, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "Maybe we were wrong for the right reasons. Or right for the wrong reasons. I'm so confused right now I can't tell which way is up." They sat in the car for another few minutes, neither of them quite ready to go inside and face whatever came next. Finally, James squeezed her hand and said, "Come on. Let's go inside. We can figure the rest out together." Family reactions. Inside, their home felt like a sanctuary. Rachel kicked off her heels and walked barefoot into the kitchen, filling the kettle for tea out of pure habit. James loosened his tie and rolled up his shirt sleeves, transforming from CEO to her husband with those simple gestures. "I should call my dad," he said, pulling out his phone. "Before he hears about this from someone else." "James, wait." Rachel turned from the stove. "What if he's disappointed? What if he thinks we handled this all wrong?" "My dad?" James looked genuinely surprised. "Rachel, he's going to be thrilled. He's been asking when I was going to settle down since I turned 30. The fact that I married someone brilliant who can actually tolerate me is going to make his entire year. But we kept it secret. We didn't have a real wedding. He didn't even know you were seeing anyone seriously." Rachel heard the anxiety in her own voice and tried to calm it. Parents want to be part of these moments. James crossed the kitchen and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "My dad wants me to be happy. That's all he's ever wanted. And I am happy. Deliriously, completely, sometimes irrationally happy because I get to be married to you." Before Rachel could respond, James's phone rang. He glanced at the screen and showed her the caller ID, "Dad." "Too late to rehearse what we're going to say," he muttered, answering the call. "Hi, Dad." Rachel could hear Robert Callahan's voice through the phone, deep and warm but clearly agitated. "James Patrick Callahan, I just received a very interesting phone call from Walter Henderson, whose son works at your company. Is it true that you've been married for 10 months and neglected to mention this to your father?" James winced. "Dad, I can explain. I certainly hope so, because I've been sitting here trying to understand why my only son would get married without inviting his father to the wedding, without even mentioning that he was dating anyone seriously, and then I realized something." Robert paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had softened. "You must have had a good reason. So I'm calling to hear it." Rachel felt her throat tighten with emotion. She gently took the phone from James and said, "Mr. Callahan?" "It's Rachel. Rachel Bennett. I mean, Rachel Callahan now. And before James tries to take the blame for everything, I need you to know that keeping our marriage private was a mutual decision." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Then Robert said, "Rachel. The marketing director James has been mentioning for the past 3 years. The one whose campaigns he couldn't stop talking about. The one who apparently shares his terrible taste in science fiction movies and his strange addiction to midnight pizza." Despite everything, Rachel smiled. "That would be me." "Well," Robert said, and she could hear the smile in his voice now too. "In that case, welcome to the family. Even if my son has the communication skills of a particularly stubborn rock. Now, when can I meet you properly? Because I have 10 months of getting to know my daughter-in-law to catch up on." Return to Horizon. The next morning, Rachel woke up to sunlight streaming through their bedroom windows and the realization that she had no idea what she was supposed to do with her day. For 6 years, her routine had been automatic: wake up, prepare for work, head to the office. Now, technically, she had been fired. Even though Patricia had been fired immediately after, even though James had made it clear that Rachel's position was secure, there was still paperwork, procedures, formalities that needed to be addressed. "What if they don't want me back?" she asked James over breakfast. He was eating cereal and reading the news on his tablet, looking far more relaxed than someone who had fired his COO and revealed his secret marriage should look. "Rachel, you're not going back because they want you. You're going back because you have a job to do and clients who depend on you." He looked up from his tablet. "Also, Frank from HR called me at 6 this morning. Apparently the entire marketing department has threatened to quit if you're not reinstated immediately. Angela started a petition." Rachel's eyes widened. "She did what?" "Got 73 signatures in less than 12 hours. It's quite impressive, actually." James showed her his phone, where an email from Angela included a scanned document titled, "Official Petition for the Immediate Reinstatement of Rachel Callahan, the Best Boss We've Ever Had." Rachel felt tears spring to her eyes. They did that for me. People who know you, who work with you, who've seen your talent and integrity up close for years, they know the truth. James reached across the table to take her hand. The only person who didn't know the truth was Patricia, and she's gone now. When Rachel walked into Horizon Media Group at 9 o'clock that morning, she wasn't sure what to expect. Stares? Whispers? Awkward conversations? What she got instead was a round of applause that started in the marketing department and spread throughout the entire 33rd floor. Angela was waiting by her office door with a coffee and a smile. "Welcome back, Mrs. Callahan. Or do you prefer Ms. Bennett? Or some combination? We're all very confused about the proper etiquette here." "Rachel is fine," she said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Same as always." "Except nothing is the same as always," Michael pointed out, appearing behind Angela with several other team members. "You're married to our CEO. You've been living this entire secret double life. And you somehow managed to make Patricia Donovan get fired in less than 24 hours. You're basically a superhero." Rachel laughed, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. "I'm really not. I'm just someone who wanted to keep her personal life private and maybe handled it badly." "You handled it fine," Diana said firmly. "Patricia was a nightmare who was looking for any excuse to fire people and consolidate power. You just happened to be convenient. The fact that it backfired on her spectacularly is justice, not bad handling." The first public lunch. At noon, James appeared at her office door, and the simple act of him standing there during work hours, not hiding, not pretending they barely knew each other, felt revolutionary. "Lunch?" he asked, exactly as he would have asked at home. Rachel saved her document and grabbed her purse. "Where to?" "That Italian place you love. The one with the carbonara you claim is better than anything in Rome." They walked through the office together, and Rachel was hyper-aware of every glance, every double take, every whispered conversation that stopped when they approached. But James seemed completely unbothered, holding doors for her, resting his hand briefly on the small of her back as they waited for the elevator, all the small gestures of affection that had been forbidden for so long. The restaurant was busy with the lunch crowd, but they were seated quickly at a corner table. After they ordered, James reached across the table and took her hand, right there in public view where anyone from Horizon might see them. "How does this feel?" he asked. "Terrifying," Rachel admitted. "Also wonderful. Also still terrifying." "We can go back to hiding if you want," James said, though his expression suggested he really hoped she would say no. "We can't go back," Rachel said softly. "That's the thing about secrets. Once they're out, you can't put them back in the box. We can only go forward." "Forward sounds good to me," James said, squeezing her hand. The difficult call. That afternoon, Rachel had a video conference with a potential new client, a tech startup looking for a complete brand overhaul. The CEO, Brandon Walsh, was a 32-year-old entrepreneur with the kind of aggressive confidence that sometimes masked insecurity. 10 minutes into the presentation, Brandon interrupted her. "Before we go any further, I need to ask about something I read online. You're married to James Callahan, right? The CEO of Horizon?" Rachel felt her stomach tighten, but she kept her voice professional. "That's correct. James and I have been married for 10 months. So when I'm working with you, I'm really working with his influence and connections." Brandon leaned back in his chair, looking skeptical. "How do I know I'm getting your actual expertise and not just access to your husband's network?" The question stung, but Rachel had been preparing for it mentally since yesterday. "Mr. Walsh, I've been in marketing for 8 years. I've managed campaigns for automotive companies, healthcare organizations, and consumer goods brands. My portfolio speaks for itself, and I'm happy to provide references from clients I worked with long before I met my husband. But you can't deny that being married to a CEO gives you advantages other marketers don't have," Brandon pressed. You're right, Rachel said calmly. I can't deny that. Just like I can't deny that my graduate degree from Northwestern gives me advantages over people who didn't have access to that education. Or that being a native English speaker gives me advantages in this market. Or that being able-bodied gives me advantages over people with disabilities. She paused, meeting Brandon's eyes through the screen. We all have advantages and disadvantages, Mr. Walsh. The question is whether we use our advantages ethically and whether we deliver results. I can show you results. 27 successful campaigns in 6 years. Client retention rate of 91%. Award-winning work that increased revenue for every single company I've worked with. Brandon was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. Fair point. Show me what you've got. By the end of the call, Brandon had agreed to move forward with a contract. When Rachel closed her laptop, she felt exhausted but also strangely exhilarated. She had faced the question she'd been dreading and had answered it with honesty and confidence. Evening reflection. That evening, Rachel and James sat on their back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Rachel had changed into comfortable clothes, yoga pants and one of James's old college sweatshirts. He had his arm around her shoulders, and they shared a bottle of wine that Angela had sent over with a note saying, "For surviving your first day as a public couple. Do you regret it?" Rachel asked quietly. Any of it? The secret marriage, the reveal, the drama? James was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. I regret that you were humiliated yesterday. I regret that Patricia blindsided you instead of coming to me first. I regret that we felt like we had to hide something that should have been celebrated. He turned to look at her, his expression soft in the fading light. But I don't regret marrying you. I don't regret trying to protect your career and your reputation. And I don't regret standing up in that conference room and telling everyone the truth, because watching you be attacked for loving me was unbearable. Rachel leaned her head on his shoulder. I was so scared that everyone would think less of me. That they would assume I only got my job because of you. Some people probably will think that, James said honestly. Some people will always look for ways to diminish other people's accomplishments. But the people who matter, the people who know you and work with you, they know the truth. Angela asked me tonight why we didn't trust her enough to tell her, Rachel admitted. And I didn't have a good answer. We didn't keep it secret because we didn't trust people. We kept it secret because we were afraid of judgment that maybe was never going to come. So what do we do now? James asked. Rachel thought about Brandon Walsh's skepticism, about Angela's hurt feelings, about the 73 people who had signed a petition for her return. She thought about walking through the office holding James's hand, eating lunch together in public, not having to pretend to be strangers. Now we prove them right, she said finally. Everyone who believed in me, who signed that petition, who defended my work. We prove that their faith was justified. I work harder, deliver better results, and show everyone that Rachel Callahan is just as competent as Rachel Bennett ever was. And us? James asked. What about us? Rachel turned in his arms and kissed him softly. Us, we just get to be married. No more hiding. No more separate cars and careful distance. Just two people who love each other, building a life together. I like the sound of that, James murmured against her lips. As the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Rachel realized that the past 2 days had been terrifying and liberating in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more questions, continued scrutiny. But for the first time in 10 months, she would face those challenges as her complete self, not as two separate people trying to occupy the same space. And that, she thought as James pulled her closer, was worth any amount of temporary discomfort. 3 months of change. 3 months after the conference room revelation, Rachel stood in front of the mirror in their bedroom, studying her reflection with a mixture of wonder and mild panic. Her face looked the same, her auburn hair still pulled back in its professional style, her green eyes clear and alert despite the early hour. But something fundamental had shifted inside her, something that would change everything all over again. The pregnancy test sat on the bathroom counter, its 2 pink lines still vivid and undeniable. Pregnant. She was pregnant. Rachel and James had talked about children in the abstract way that newlyweds do, someday plans and hypothetical futures. But they had agreed to wait, to let the dust settle from their public reveal, to establish their new normal before adding more complexity to their lives. Apparently, life had other plans. She picked up the test and studied it again, as if the lines might have changed in the past 30 seconds. They hadn't. She was still pregnant, still terrified, still overwhelmingly happy, still completely uncertain about what came next. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of adjustment. The media attention had been intense but brief, with a few business publications running stories about secret CEO marriage before moving on to more scandalous news. Inside Horizon Media Group, life had settled into a new rhythm. People knew Rachel and James were married, which meant they could actually be married at work. They ate lunch together regularly. They collaborated on projects openly. They arrived and left together without elaborate choreography. But it also meant increased scrutiny of Rachel's work. Every project she led, every client she landed, every promotion or opportunity came with whispered speculation about whether she had earned it or received it because of her marriage. Rachel had responded by working harder than ever, delivering exceptional results that made it impossible to question her competence. She had landed the Brandon Walsh tech startup account and executed a rebrand that increased their market visibility by 43%. She had pitched and won a major pharmaceutical client that Angela and Michael had helped her pursue. She had mentored 3 junior marketers who all received promotions based on their work. And she had done it all while navigating the strange new reality of being known as both a talented marketing director and the CEO's wife. Now, staring at the pregnancy test, Rachel realized she was about to add one more identity to that complicated mix: mother. The revelation. James was already awake when she came downstairs, making coffee and scrolling through his phone at their kitchen island. He looked up when she entered, and his smile was automatic and bright. That smile still made her heart skip, even after almost 4 years together. "Morning," he said, setting down his phone. "I made the good coffee. The beans from that place in Pioneer Square you love." Rachel walked over to him, the pregnancy test hidden in her hand, and kissed him softly. "James, I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made him set down his coffee cup immediately. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Rachel said quickly. "Better than fine, actually. Just unexpected." She took a breath and held out the pregnancy test. "I'm pregnant." James stared at the test for a long moment, his expression cycling through shock, confusion, and dawning comprehension. Then he looked up at her face, and his eyes were shining with tears. "Really?" His voice cracked slightly. "We're going to have a baby?" Rachel nodded, her own eyes filling. "Really? I know we said we were going to wait, and the timing isn't great, and I just signed on to lead the Morrison campaign, but..." James cut her off by pulling her into his arms and holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "This is the best news I've ever received. After marrying you, this is the absolute best thing that's ever happened to me." Rachel felt relief flood through her. She hadn't realized how worried she'd been about his reaction until this moment. "You're not concerned about the timing? About how complicated this makes everything?" James pulled back to look at her face, wiping away the tears on her cheeks with his thumbs. "Rachel, everything is always complicated. Life doesn't wait for perfect timing. And I can't imagine anything more perfect than having a child with you." They stood in their kitchen, holding each other, as the morning sunlight streamed through the windows and the coffee grew cold on the counter. For a few minutes, the world contracted to just the two of them and the tiny possibility growing inside her. "We should call Dr. Morrison," James said eventually, his practical side asserting itself. Schedule an appointment. Start taking vitamins. Oh God, we need to read books. Do we have any books about pregnancy? Rachel laughed, feeling lighter than she had all morning. We'll figure it out. Together. Sharing the news. They decided to wait until after the first doctor's appointment to tell anyone else, but 3 days later, sitting in Dr. Morrison's office, hearing their baby's heartbeat for the first time, made everything suddenly, intensely real. Everything looks perfect, Dr. Morrison said, smiling at their awestruck expressions. Based on the measurements, I'd say you're about 8 weeks along. Due date looks like early December. December, Rachel repeated softly. A winter baby. She tried to imagine holding a newborn while snow fell outside their windows. James squeezed her hand tightly, his eyes still fixed on the ultrasound screen where their baby appeared as a tiny, flickering spot. Can we get copies of the pictures? Of course, Dr. Morrison said warmly. And congratulations to you both. This is a very exciting time. Driving home from the appointment, Rachel found herself thinking about who they needed to tell first. Her mother would be thrilled but would immediately start planning and worrying. Her sister would be excited and full of advice. Angela would probably cry happy tears and then start designing baby shower invitations. But there was one person who needed to hear the news before anyone else. We should tell your dad, Rachel said, looking at James. Today. James nodded, his expression thoughtful. He's going to be impossible. He's going to want to buy every baby item ever created and probably start a college fund before the first trimester is over. He's going to be a wonderful grandfather, Rachel said softly. Robert Callahan had become a fixture in their lives over the past 3 months. After the initial phone call where he had welcomed Rachel into the family, he had insisted on regular dinners at his house, where he shared stories about James's childhood and asked Rachel thoughtful questions about her work and her dreams. He had the kind of quiet wisdom that came from 70 years of living fully and paying attention, and Rachel had grown to love him almost as much as she loved his son. They called him from the car, putting the phone on speaker. James, Rachel, Robert answered warmly. To what do I owe the pleasure of a midday call? Has my son finally learned to take lunch breaks like a normal human being? Dad, we have news, James said, glancing at Rachel. Big news. Well, don't keep me in suspense. Is it about work? Did you land that international client you were pursuing? It's not about work, Rachel said, smiling. It's about family. Robert, you're going to be a grandfather. The silence on the other end of the line lasted just long enough for Rachel to worry. Then Robert's voice came through, thick with emotion. A grandfather. You're having a baby. Due in December, James confirmed. We just came from the doctor. Everything looks healthy and perfect. Oh my dear children, Robert said, and Rachel could hear that he was crying. This is the most wonderful news. Your mother would have been so happy, James. She always wanted grandchildren. Rachel felt her own tears start again. James's mother had died 6 years ago, long before Rachel met him, but she had heard so many stories that she felt she knew the woman. Brilliant, kind, funny, devoted to her family. The kind of mother Rachel hoped she could be. We'll send you the ultrasound pictures, James said, his voice unsteady. It mostly looks like a blob right now, but it's our blob. Robert laughed through his tears. I expect regular updates. Weekly photos. And you'll bring the baby to visit as soon as possible after birth. I've already decided I'm going to be the kind of grandfather who spoils them absolutely rotten. After they hung up, Rachel and James sat in their driveway for a few minutes, processing the reality of what they had just set in motion. A baby. They were going to have a baby. Their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't fully imagine yet. Are you scared? Rachel asked. Terrified, James admitted. Also happier than I've ever been. Is it possible to be both simultaneously? I think that's basically what parenting is, Rachel said. Terror and joy in equal measure. The public presentation. 2 weeks later, Rachel stood in the main conference room at Horizon Media Group, preparing to present the final strategy for the Morrison campaign to Elena Morrison and her executive team. It was the biggest account Rachel had managed since the conference room revelation, and the pressure to prove herself was immense. She was also 12 weeks pregnant, dealing with morning sickness that struck at random times, and exhausted in a way she'd never experienced before. But none of that showed as she opened her laptop and smiled at the assembled clients. "Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We've spent the past 3 months developing a comprehensive strategy for Morrison Renewable Energy's expansion, and I'm excited to share what my team and I have created." James was sitting in the back of the room, present for the high-level strategic discussion but careful to let Rachel lead. They had established clear boundaries about his involvement in her projects. He provided oversight and support, but the work, the presentations, the client relationships, those were all hers. As Rachel walked through the presentation, she felt herself slip into the familiar rhythm of her expertise. She had spent years learning how to read clients, how to anticipate questions, how to present complex strategies in clear, compelling language. The Morrison team asked smart questions, and she answered each one with confidence and detail. Elena Morrison, the CEO, leaned forward during the budget discussion. "This is impressive work, Rachel. The market analysis alone is more thorough than anything our previous consultants provided. But I have to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way, how much of this strategy came from you versus from Horizon's CEO?" The question hung in the air. Rachel had been expecting it, had prepared for it, but it still stung slightly. She glanced at James, who was watching her with steady confidence, then looked back at Elena. "That's a fair question," Rachel said calmly. "And I'll answer it honestly. James and I discussed the high-level strategic direction, the same way I would discuss any major account with the CEO of any company I worked for. His insights about market positioning and competitive analysis were valuable, and I incorporated them where they strengthened the proposal." She paused, clicking to the next slide. "However, the market research, the specific tactical implementation, the timeline, the budget allocations, the creative direction, and the detailed execution plan were developed by me and my team. Angela Torres, our senior designer, created the visual brand identity. Michael Green, our account manager, handled the competitive analysis. Diana Wu, our lead copywriter, developed the messaging strategy." Rachel met Elena's eyes directly. "I'm a better marketer because I'm married to someone who understands this industry deeply and can challenge my thinking. But this work is mine. And if you have doubts about that, I encourage you to speak with any of my other clients, several of whom I worked with before I ever met James Callahan." Elena was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I appreciate your honesty. And for what it's worth, this is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we were hoping for. Whether it's yours alone or a collaboration, it's excellent work." By the end of the presentation, Morrison Renewable Energy had approved the full proposal and doubled their initial budget allocation. As the clients filed out of the conference room, Elena paused by Rachel's chair. "Between you and me," she said quietly, "I'm also a woman in a male-dominated industry who constantly has to prove her competence. I asked that question because I knew what it felt like to have my work questioned. And I wanted to see how you handled it." The growing life. At 16 weeks, Rachel's pregnancy became impossible to hide. Her clothes were getting tighter, and the morning sickness had finally faded, replaced by a voracious appetite and a visible curve to her belly. She and James decided to announce it at work before people started speculating. Angela organized a small gathering in the marketing department, complete with sparkling cider and cupcakes. When Rachel shared the news, the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. "A baby!" Angela squealed, pulling Rachel into a careful hug. "You're going to be the most organized mother in history." This child is going to have color-coded schedules and strategic development plans. Please don't give her ideas, James said, laughing. She's already researching preschools and the baby isn't due for 5 more months. Michael raised his glass of cider. To Rachel and James. May your child inherit her mother's intelligence and work ethic, and let's hope they skip her father's terrible jokes. Hey, James protested, but he was grinning. As the celebration continued around them, Rachel found a quiet moment to step out onto the office balcony. The Seattle skyline stretched out before her, familiar and beautiful. Below, the city moved with its usual energy, people pursuing their dreams and building their lives. She thought about the past year, the revelation, the challenges, the victories. She thought about the tiny life growing inside her, the person who would know her as mom rather than marketing director or CEO's wife. She thought about the future that was rushing toward them, uncertain and exciting and terrifying in the best possible way. James joined her on the balcony, slipping his arm around her waist and resting his hand gently on her growing belly. What are you thinking about? Everything, Rachel said honestly. How much has changed? How much will keep changing? Whether we're ready for any of this. We're not ready, James said confidently. No one is ever actually ready to become a parent. You just do your best and hope the love makes up for all the mistakes you'll inevitably make. Rachel leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. I love you. I know I don't say it enough, especially at work, but I love you so much it sometimes scares me. I love you too, James replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. And I'm so proud of you. Not just because you're brilliant at your job or because you're carrying our child, but because you're brave enough to be completely yourself, even when it would be easier to hide. As they stood together watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Rachel realized that this was what they had been working toward all along. Not perfection, not complete success without struggle, but authenticity. The freedom to be fully themselves, married and professional, in love and ambitious, partners in every sense of the word. The office door opened behind them, and Angela's voice called out, Rachel. Phone call from Brandon Walsh. He says it's urgent and he'll only talk to you. Rachel smiled at James. Duty calls. Go be brilliant, he said, releasing her. I'll save you a cupcake. As Rachel walked back into the office, toward her work and her colleagues and the career she had built with her own hands and mind, she felt a deep sense of contentment. This was her life. Complicated, challenging, sometimes exhausting, but completely, authentically hers. And in 5 months, she would add one more role to her collection, mother. The thought was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. But if the past year had taught her anything, it was that the best things in life were usually both. Epilogue, December morning. On a cold December morning, Rachel gave birth to a healthy baby girl they named Caroline Grace Callahan. She had James's dark hair and Rachel's green eyes, and she entered the world with a loud cry that seemed to announce her determination to be noticed. Robert Callahan held his granddaughter for the first time with tears streaming down his face, declaring her the most beautiful baby ever born and immediately promising to set up her college fund. Angela brought flowers and baby clothes she had designed herself, covered in tiny marketing slogans like Future CEO and Brand Ambassador in Training. The team from Horizon sent a massive bouquet with a card signed by everyone in the marketing department. Congratulations to the best boss and the newest member of the Horizon family. And as Rachel held her daughter in the quiet hours of early morning, with James sleeping in the chair beside her hospital bed and the Seattle rain pattering softly against the windows, she thought about all the different versions of herself she had been over the past year. Rachel Bennett, the marketing director determined to prove her worth. Rachel Callahan, the wife learning to be married in public.